My name is Terence McKenna, and my training is basically in shamanism and botany and ethnography. And my interest is in hallucinogenic drugs, especially plant hallucinogens as they're used in a shamanic context. And what impels me to speak to a room full of people like this is the belief that the major important point regarding hallucinogens has been largely overlooked, even though we're now 15 or 20 or 30, depending on how you count it, years into the psychedelic age. The central point about the psychedelic experience is the content of the experience, and this has been occluded or obfuscated by the behavioral and statistical and scientific methods that have been brought to bear to study hallucinogenic experience. So what I'm going to address this evening is essentially my own experience with hallucinogens and how I extrapolate it into the world based on its own being and other people's psychedelic experiences that I have interacted with. Before I get into that, I want to clarify something about shamanism. There are two schools about the basis of shamanism, shamanistic experience. One is the older school exemplified by Mircea Eliade, who holds that all narcotic shamanism is decadent. He prefers drumming, dancing, self-mutilation, even ordeal poisons, all precede the efficacy of hallucinogens. He believes they are resorted to when the tradition is vitiated and people are grasping at straws. I take this to be simply a cultural bias of the school of anthropology that he exemplified and the time in which his work was done. Now, Gordon Wasson has taken the opposite tack and takes the position that non-narcotic shamanism is decadent because it is on its way to becoming ritual. In other words, drumming, fasting, flagellation, all these things work to a degree and sometimes, and they are not dependable in the same way that hallucinogens are. And this has created this plays on Western people's biases in favor of the idea that you have to work hard to get somewhere, and if you don't work hard, it isn't useful. My own experience in looking at non-narcotic shamanism, essentially non-narcotic shamanism in Indonesia and in Nepal, was that Wasson's intuition was very correct. There is a grasping after, and I see that grasping after blending into the evolution of all higher religions. In other words, experientially, there is only one religion, and it is shamanism and shamanic ecstasy. But it is very difficult to maintain in an agrarian context. Hunting and gathering societies, which have much less structured social hierarchies, seem to be able to function with the hallucinogenic experience embedded in them. As soon as you rise even to the level of primitive agriculturalists, it becomes much more important to be able to get up in the morning and go to work than it does to have these ecstatic experiences because the plants have to be tended, the fields tilled, and so on. I formed these opinions about non-narcotic shamanism early in my career of looking at this phenomenon. I didn't contact narcotic shamanism until I went to the Amazon basin, initially in 1971. And although I was familiar with the hallucinogenic state from growing up basically in the counterculture in Berkeley. But what I found in South America after sifting through these various experiences is that the family of drugs constellated around tryptophan, specifically DMT, dimethyltryptamine, and psilocybin, which is chemically very similar to DMT, that these compounds had a relationship to reality far different from all the other hallucinogens. The scopolamine, hyoscyamine, tropane family that you get in datura and that kind of thing, or LSD, which laboratory LSD does not occur in nature, but isomers of it occur in nature, although to be taken at hallucinogenic doses, they must be taken at hundreds of times the amount. So that's basically the scientific, medical, anthropological basis of what I'm saying. A career spent in Asia and more recently in the Amazon looking at this phenomenon. And I want to take my conclusions tonight and contrast them with the modern predicament and try to make a model using the hallucinogenic experience, a model that makes some of the anxieties of being human, and especially some of the anxieties of being human in the 20th century context, more palatable. And to do that, I want to evoke a number of abysses, a number of empty places that our minds tend normally to shy away from. First to invoke them, and then to integrate them through the idea of what is conventionally called the UFO or the UFO experience. These abysses are basically four embedded in a fifth. The four are the biological abyss that is represented by death and dying, that is the central crisis of every individual existence, and almost as a reflection of that crisis on a higher plane, the historical abyss represented by the end of history and the apocalypse and possibly the millennium, but in any case, the end of history that Western religion, whether it be Judaism, Christianity, or whatever, has appointed to our world and made basic to Western man's view of things, and which now, because of the existence of nuclear weapons and this kind of thing, poses a terminal threat to the culture. So, two abysses, the biological and the historical, the latter being symbolized in the apocalyptic crisis. A third abyss could be called the psychological, and this is represented by dreams, most in general experience, and by hallucinogens. It is this casting off from the moorings of the ego, making the night sea journey into the other, and being at the mercy of, call it the collective unconscious, the overmind of the species, what have you. The fourth abyss, which is one whose emergence is unique in our time, is the actual physical abyss which surrounds this planet for light years in all directions. Because suddenly now, because of our level of technology and scientific mapping, we realize that it is there, and we realize that it is a source of our cosmic loneliness, and we realize that it presents an immense challenge of the sort we like to accept as a Western culture, challenges of energy, engineering, and distance. So these are the four abysses: the abyss of space, the abyss of death, the abyss of the psychedelic experience, and the abyss of dying. And these four general categories have to be seen embedded in a somewhat subtler kind of abyss, which is the abyss of the unspeakable. In other words, that language which is the primary tool of cognition of the species, casts nets against these other gulfs and comes away with different kinds of maps. But you cannot put much trust in these maps unless you've carried out a thorough analysis of language. And once you've done that, for sure you will not put much trust in any of these maps, because the thinness of the web on which it all is hung will be readily apparent. Okay.